So, hello, my name is Sean Pierce. I am the maintainer of Gerrit Code Review, and I work for Google. And I keep doing this talk. I might have to stop doing it. It's getting a little old. So, what is Gerrit Code Review? It's a web-based code review system. Read code, you comment on the code. Purpose is to try and make the code better, and really to make your developers better. Share project conventions, learn each other's code so that you increase your bus factor away from a bus factor of 1. If you remember Brian's keynote from Tuesday, bus factor of 1 is not so good. Gerrit Code Review is also surprisingly a Git server. It's got very fine-grained ACLs, and you can use it to control access to your repositories, not just who can push code into the repository, but also what branches they can see and what branches they can fetch or clone from the repository. So this makes it really good for working in environments where you need to hide a security branch that has a bug fix in it for a little while until you have a release binary available to hand out to your customers, or you just don't want people to see a certain experiment that you're working on, or you're collaborating with different partner companies and you can't share code with all of them. The Git server supports both SSH and HTTP, making it very natural to communicate with. These are two protocols Git does quite well these days. Deployment for it is quite simple. It's a WAR file, goes into either Tomcat or Jetty, or it's got a self-contained daemon that uses Jetty. So it's pretty simple to install. The project has been around for 5 years. We're Apache licensed. We've got 93 dependencies that we bundle into our deliverable that we make available to you. Most of these are Apache 2, some are BSD, a couple are MPL or the EPL. So by and large, it's open source free software that you have all rights to all the source code, and you can modify and build your own version of Gerrit if you need to. And a number of our deployments do run patched versions of Gerrit. There's 6 maintainers actually working on Gerrit. It's not just myself, although I did start the project. There's 2 of us at Google. 2 are at SAP, and they've been a fantastic supporter of Gerrit through the years. 1 is at Qualcomm, and 1 is at Sony Mobile. So we're kind of a diverse project. We don't really have a project home. We're not hosted by the Eclipse Foundation. We're hosted by Google right now. But we're a lot more than just Google as far as developers go. And there's about 170 people that have been contributing to Gerrit through the years. So we're a pretty broad base of folks contributing from a large number of projects and companies. Our 2.7 release just came out, and our 2.8 release is currently being tested. There's a release candidate available. We'll have another one in like another few days or a week or so. So 2.8 is probably going to be released within the next month. What can you do with it, aside from install it? Well, you can set up a central repository for your team, one location that everybody can access your code from. Code reviews work at the commit level, not at a branch level, the way a GitHub pull request does. So if your developer creates 5 new commits locally, when he sends those to Gerrit Code Review, those become 5 code reviews. And this allows you to very quickly see if people are doing things like fix the typo as a commit message, and fix that bug that they off by 1 thing that I didn't want. These don't provide a lot of value over long-term history when you're developing a new feature. Typically, you want to squash these down into a single isolated commit that really makes sense. So the fidelity of what you see in the code review tool is exactly what you see in your Git repository for this very reason. Gerrit provides a search function, and dashboards are derived from the search features to let you see what changes are available for code review or that are still being worked on. And this is an important view into your overall project, particularly when you have more than one Git repository. Pull requests are often looked at from a single repository perspective, but that might not be what your product or your application is around. So the screenshot's probably not readable from anybody beyond me in the audience. I'll try to show more zoomed in a little bit later. But you can see a lot of, this project column has a lot of different names. You can see the pixels are a little longer in some and shorter in others, yes? So they're different names. So I often get asked, GitHub is becoming very popular, and GitHub Enterprise Edition, or whatever they call it, you can buy it and install it inside your company. And people are looking at it, and they're like, what's the difference with Gerrit? Well, Gerrit was created back in 2008 to support the Android open source project. And at the time, in 2008, Android was 200 Git repositories. And we were hoping, the ever hopeful, we're going to open source something, people are going to love it, they'll flock in droves to help us build this. We were expecting like 1,000 contributors to come help us with Android. So I don't know what the real number is. I don't know how well our expectation met reality, but we were concerned about having 200,000 forks that people would have to go looking through to find code reviews in order to include them into the platform. And I think this is kind of borne out that building Gerrit worked because Android's now 563 repositories. It has grown over time. And there's no way we could manage 563,000 forks. I'm sure GitHub could store all of those, but we could not plow through all of those forks looking for pull requests and branches and trying to get things put together. It's just not manageable for us. So right now today, Android has about 425 open code reviews that have been touched since October 1st. So there's a lot of code reviews that are still in process within the last 30 days that are being worked on. And these are spread all over these 563 repositories. It's very important that there's one unified view of this is what the project is trying to do that anybody can come look at. The workflow is also quite different. A GitHub pull request workflow, I don't know if people can even read this text. You start out by you clone the repository from the upstream project, and you jump into it and you start modifying it. And so you pop it up in VI, you modify something, and you fix the frobinators, your commit message, whatever. Now you're stuck with what do I do with my change? I have this commit. It's perfect. It's ready to go in the project. What do I do with it? You go back to the web UI, click the fork button. Now you have your own copy of this repository. If the repository is small, it takes a couple seconds. If the repository is huge, like a gig, might take 30 seconds to get your fork. Whatever, you get your fork. Now you have to add a new remote that points to your fork. So you have to type git remote add, I want to call it me, type in the URL for your fork or copy and paste it from the GitHub web interface. And then you push your branch to your fork. And now it's available on your fork. Nobody knows about it, nobody cares. Now you have to go back to the web UI and create a pull request. And the pull request will hopefully notify the project that you have this code that is perfect and ready to be brought in. And I understand GitHub has applications for Mac and Windows or Linux or whatever, and some API calls that you can try to make this a little bit more automated. But by and large, this is what you have to do if you don't have those tools or you haven't installed those tools or you don't like those tools. I don't know. I'm not a big GitHub user, can you tell? OK, so this is what you would have to do. And this is not the workflow we wanted for people trying to contribute to Android. We wanted it to be simpler. So a Gerrit project, you clone it. And in this example, I use Gerrit itself. Gerrit is self-hosted on Gerrit, haha. So we clone Gerrit. And let's say I'm going to modify our bucket config file to add an alias. And I can make a commit message, add a new target alias for the documentation indexes. And I push it back to origin. I already have the URL. It came in as part of the clone. I'm pushing it back to the project. Gerrit intercepts the push and converts your commit into a code review. So you don't have to go create a fork. You don't have to add your fork's URL to your repository. It becomes part of the upstream project. Whether or not you keep your fork around, you don't have to worry about that fork. Whether or not that fork is part of your free quota or what have you in some hosting site, it's part of the upstream project. The upstream project is taking care of all of these things for you. And Gerrit will notify the project maintainers that this is now available. They can subscribe to email updates based on what they consider to be relevant interest to them. It's available in the dashboards. People can see it and search for it. Very, very simple. So it's fantastic to use Gerrit. Yay. Deployment of Gerrit. We support a bunch of different systems for deployment. Gerrit does require a database, a SQL database, in order to store its account information, its group information, and its metadata. We support 3 databases, PostgreSQL, MySQL, and H2. I think there's Oracle support somewhere along the way for somebody who really is in an IT company that needs Oracle database or nothing else exists. The embedded H2 is fantastic. H2 is a great little database. It scales very, very well for Gerrit. It is really, really fast. We really like it for almost all of our deployments. Really big installs like to do PostgreSQL because they can do good backups, or MySQL, they can split it between machines. But by and large, huge installs of Gerrit, their SQL database is only like 100 meg. So we're not really talking about a big database here. You're really talking about just what kind of database server do I like to keep track of. I like keeping track of H2 because it's just a file in a directory where Gerrit's installed and I don't have to really think about it. As far as authentication support goes, we support OpenID authentication. This was the original idea for the Android project. You have an OpenID provider, and you give us your OpenID URL, and you're logged in, and that's it. And of course, Google supports OpenID, Yahoo supports OpenID. There's a lot of OpenID providers. So that's what we were using for the Android open source project, and that's kind of the default and native mode for Gerrit. But you can also connect it up to an LDAP directory within your organization, and a lot of people have done that. And this allows you to keep all of your user accounts in LDAP, and Gerrit pulls up whatever information you need from it. And you can keep your groups in LDAP, and Gerrit will pull up group membership data that way. As I said, you can deploy the embedded Jetty that we give you. Jetty's an amazing project. I'm very happy it's at the Eclipse Foundation. And you can also deploy it as a straight WAR file into a Tomcat, Jetty, IBM WebSphere application server, whatever its name is. Pick a product that deploys WAR files. It'll run there. The SSH support is included as part of Gerrit. We use the Apache Mina SSHD software. It's a pure Java SSH server, and we run it on port 29418 by default. But you can configure this to be any port you want. And this allows us to bypass the system SSH daemon. So when you are authenticating to Gerrit, you're coming in on this port. Gerrit handles all of the SSH key authentication management, has its own SSH key database. You don't need Unix user accounts to have people SSH to the Gerrit server. Demo. People always love this when I try and do a live demo. OK. I'm supposed to be here. Yay. It's fantastic. OK, so I have a little project, and I have a README and an attribution in here, and I have a Hello World program. And I'm trying to learn Go by not using it. So here's an example, Hello World in Go. And I've already actually uploaded this to a Gerrit server that I have running. Gerrit was not meant to be zoomed in on small displays. We like our 15-inch displays at a proper resolution, not, I have no idea what this resolution is. So we have a couple code reviews here. Hello World is my first commit, and I have the README. And if I look at Hello World, it tells me who my author and committer was and the commit message. And I can see my files. I can see that I've created a file called hello.go. It's nicely syntax highlighted. And over on the side here, I can see that there's actually two changes related. If you remember my Git log, I had two commits. I had added a README, but before that, I had created Hello World. And if we look at Gerrit, we see that there's a related change of the added README. And in fact, I added a README file. And I have also made a small modification to my Go file to add a comment of where I got this code from. So fairly simple to view. Now, I need to get a reviewer for my code, so I can add somebody. And there's now a reviewer. And I'm going to switch. So we have this fake authentication mode. It's awesome, very secure. You click the link, and they log in as that person. So I can flip over to the reviewer user, and the reviewer user has this as an incoming review. They would have received an email if I had a proper SEPTI server running with email address that mattered, but I don't. So they can come in and they can look at this code, and they can open the README, and they can browse over to the documentation, and they can say, maybe you should put this in the README. You can place a comment right on the code. You can also do something like place a comment on a region of text and say, should this be SSL? And I can see that that's highlighted as a separate block. And the reviewer can now reply to this and say, you know what, I really don't like this particular change because the two comments I've made, they should be corrected. So I can go back to my admin, and that's not the right change. And I can see that there are two comments on this. And of course, these comments were emailed, but like I said, I don't have a SEPTI server running, so who really cares about email? And we can see that my reviewer has asked me to address these two comments. And I can see that this is related to the SSL tag, the attribute, and this here. So I'm going to say, no, SSL is not available here, and I'm going to say that I will, in fact, replace this README. OK, that's a bug. I need to fix that ordering. This UI is actually very new. It's not yet live, but it's better in most ways. I have to fix that. OK, so we have these two comments in here, and I'll reply to them and say that those will be fixed. But what do I do to actually fix it? Well, I go in and I'll grab my comment, the URL, and I'll put it in my README, and I amend my commit. And then I push it back to the origin server. And now Gerrit has it. And if I come back, you see Gerrit says there's updates available to this change. And I click show, and I see that there's a new version available. The comments are now gone, but we can see that I have the code should be here. The comments saying the code is from the location, and this is still that delta. But if I compare the two differences, there's no difference with the prior version because we didn't really change it. So where's my little switch box? So I can switch back over to my reviewer. And my reviewer can say, OK, the code looks fine. And you can see that my reviewer says +2. Code review is perfect. Good. But there's a project configuration in here that says, I also need somebody to approve Go style. And I don't yet have a Go style approval. And in fact, this reviewer is not allowed to score the Go style category. They can only score the code review category. So the reviewer likes the code, but I need somebody to confirm that I know how to program in Go, because I don't. So we can flip to a completely different user. And this person doesn't have any reviews in their dashboard at all. They don't know what's going on. But you can always go look at all open all open changes and see changes that are available. And I can go in and I can read this code, of course, and I can say that the style is good. And now the change is ready to submit. It is now available for somebody to submit the code. And there's a dependent change, the hello world. I'll say that's also good. And switch back to my reviewer. This also needs to be code reviewed. What you're kind of missing here is there's this button right here, which is sort of a shortcut for doing this. So both changes are now ready to submit. They both have the two required attributes, code review and Go style. And I'll switch over to my original developer account. And he can look at this change, and he can say, oh, good, it's ready to submit. I have my approvals, and I have a submit button. Who has power to submit changes into the code base can be independent of who has permission to mark certain things as approved along the way. This is very useful. Like you can see that the original developer can be the one that performs the submit in case the build breaks. He can be around to roll it back or fix it, while the other reviewers are looking at particular aspects of a change. So I can submit this change, but it's not going to submit quite yet because I've submitted the top commit in my list. I still need its ancestor to also be in the repository because I've built on that work. So I can switch over to this commit and submit it, and now they've both been merged. And I fetch back from origin. I download the master branch, and my two commits are now in origin. Gerrit merged them into the repository for me, and they're now readily available. How I manage the configuration is there's a config file available per project that's stored in Git that you can declare your own definitions in. It contains the access control information. In this case, it says the repository is owned by the administrators group. But that access control list is not complete. Obviously, we had information about who is allowed to submit and who is allowed to approve changes. These are inherited through a particular inheritance structure. And we're relying on the inherited values. I'll show you in a minute. But I declared for this particular project that there's a Go style that has to be satisfied in order for changes to be submitted. And I configured that it has a couple of values of -1, try again, and +1, it's correct. The style is fine. And we manage which files apply on, or which labels apply to which files using a small snippet of Prolog on the same branch. The top rule says if the commit contains a file with the extension .go, then you need both the code review and the Go style categories. And if there's a -2, the change cannot be submitted at all. If there's a +2, a +2, then the change is good. It can be submitted. And the same thing with Go style. However, if there are no Go files present at all, then we can use the code review category. And we don't need the Go style to be present because there's no Go code in the change. And I have another change sort of queued up here. I wrote a make file in order to compile my Hello World program. And it's relatively simple, go build hello.go. So I can add my make file. And push it to the server. And the first time you push a change, Gerrit shows you the URL of this change. And if I flip back to my browser, I can take a look at it and see that it is here. And notice that it does not require Go style. We have no Go style label present because the logic did not find a Go file, and therefore we don't need Go approval. So I can just add my buddy the reviewer. I can type his name. And we can switch over to his account. He can approve this. And we can go back to our admin. And this change is ready to submit. I don't have to get the Go style approval because there's no Go code in this change. And it's submitted. And Gerrit tells you nicely at the bottom that it's been merged to the repository. So very flexible workflow and configuration. The Gerrit server can host multiple repositories. There's the repository I've been working with here, EclipseCon, and its access controls are very simple. Actually, I was looking at a still version of the config branch. So the access controls are what you see here, and if I can refetch the configuration, and I can look now at the access controls and see that there's a label Go style given to the group Go reviewers, a label code review, and a label registered users. I forgot to download the branch back to my local repository before I showed this. You can edit this in the web UI. That's how I modified that. But permissions get inherited from all projects, and all projects provides a bunch more permissions that apply to every project below it in the inheritance hierarchy. So you have things like being able to push to a branch, or being able to submit changes, or being able to specify author or committer identities independent of what your own identity is. That's about it. I can't believe I did that demo and that fast. So, questions? Okay, the question was, where can you find documentation on Gerrit? Okay, so 2 answers to that question. One is, there's now a book available. Luca, one of our contributors, wrote a book on Gerrit. You can get it from Packet Publishing. There is a discount. I'll leave this up for a few minutes. People can grab it. It's good for until November 7th. You can buy the book. The real documentation with the project is not this book. You don't have to buy the book to get the documentation. The real documentation, I did not compile my server correctly. Normally, it is available right here as a little tab when you build a release version of the server. And the, maybe I can build the release server while I'm talking. And it's online. If you go to code.google.com/p/Gerrit, there's links to the documentation for the release servers. But we're very good about a real release binary contains the docs in that server for that server, and they're available right on the top menu. I just didn't build that in the server right now. I'm trying to get it to see if I can build it and restart with it, so I can show it to you. I'm not connected to the internet because how many of you found the Wi-Fi to be working awesome? So, one guy in the back says it works awesome. I'm not connected to Wi-Fi. I can't pull up the documentation online, but it is hyperlinked off of our project homepage. The thing to be careful about is Gerrit's self-hosted instance is running from bleeding master and has a link to documentation. And you can find documentation in there for a lot of features that have not yet shipped. And the documentation reachable from the project homepage is to released versions of software. And the documentation in the version you're running, of course, corresponds to the version you're running. We're getting a lot of questions on the mailing list about people finding stuff in the bleeding edge master docs from our own server, and then they're like, why doesn't this work on my 2.5 version? Because we're working with like what's going to be 2.9, and that docs are what's rendered for what's 2.9. We're very good about when we add a feature, we document it right away in the same commit. And so the documentation always matches what we're running, but that's not what you have. Does that answer your question? This is still taking a few minutes. Documentation construction is not the fastest thing in the world. That's why I didn't bother doing it earlier. Over here. So the question was, is there any possibility, documentation doesn't want to compile right now. Is there any possibility to integrate static analysis like check style into Gerrit? We don't yet have any fantastic integrations for this. We have a really good JSON API that you can find changes that have not yet had analysis applied to them, do the analysis yourself, and then provide comments into the files the same way a human can. They can provide the static analysis entries. So we're kind of hoping that somebody in the community will like either build a plugin for Gerrit or some sort of standalone process outside of Gerrit that uses these APIs to do that. And we'd be very happy if somebody started working on these. But we haven't done it yet as a project ourselves. Over here. So the question was, the developer in the demo had to submit a patch series and to submit each patch individually. Why? That's the model we've chosen. It's probably going to change. It's probably going to change to allow you to submit the tip, the top of the branch, and then if all of the things in the series behind it are approved, they'll auto-submit as well. We originally had intended for most use cases of Gerrit to be like one commit at a time, because that's the workflow that the Android team at Google tends to use, was they'd, coming from Perforce, they'd create a code review, or they'd create ACL in a client, and then they would mail that off to their friend to look at, and then they'd go spend time in the micro kitchen or play foosball until their friend was done reviewing, because they had one client, they couldn't do a second task. And then when we converted to Git and to Gerrit, they wanted the exact same workflow, and that same mentality of I do a commit, I mail it off to my friend, I go play foosball. And then as they got more familiar with Git, they started to get more comfortable with building a series of commits. And so the tool supports this, but we're not supporting as well as we should. And in conversations just in the last couple of weeks, we're starting to talk about we're probably going to change it to submit the tip of the series and the whole series collapses in automatically, and thus you submit once rather than 5 times. Yeah, we're going to try to improve that. It's fair. So the question was, Gerrit has multiple modes of putting a commit into the repository. One of them is fast forward only. That's the one you're complaining about? That's a bug. Okay. So in fast forward only mode, we're supposed to take exactly the commit that the developer gave us and put it, like push it into the branch. And if somebody else has put a commit in already, Gerrit's supposed to stop and require the developer to rebase his code or merge it with what's in the branch and try again. It's a very good policy if you need very strict testing, because you can't get a state in the branch that doesn't correspond to what the developer gave. Apparently, in some version, it rewrites the committer header, and it shouldn't. Oh, you said if you use Gerrit to rebase. Oh, I thought you said it was during the submit policy. So in the web UI, there's a rebase button where Gerrit can do the rebase for you, rather than having to do rebase on your commands line. And this is great if you've got a continuous integration system hooked up, because you can hit rebase in the web UI, Gerrit will do the rebase, and then the CI system can see it, compile it, and put it in. But when you rebase with the web UI, Gerrit's swapping in the committer identifier. We have fixed that. What version were you talking about? Like 2.7? It should be fixed in like 2.7 or 2.8. Oh, Eclipse is on 2.6. So it's like fixed in 2.7. I think it's fixed in 2.7. If not, it's fixed in 2.8. Because the Gerrit project had this exact same complaint ourselves when we were dogfooding Gerrit, and we said, well, let's fix this. This is retarded. I know we fixed that. Okay, so the question was, JGit has a bitmap index, which vastly accelerates clones. In what version did that first appear in Gerrit? That was in Gerrit 2.6, was the first version. And of course, it's in all subsequent versions. I am almost out of time. Any other questions? Correct. We use Prolog for the configuration, and people are not very used to that, but it is kind of cool. How that turned out was we really wanted to allow you to configure what constituted a valid submit, like that this is allowed to be submitted to the repository. And every time I talk to somebody and ask them, what sort of rule would you like the server to enforce before a change can be submitted, they gave me 3 new answers. Right? Never ask a loaded question like this to anybody ever. So I took a bunch of different examples that people gave me, and I tried to write them like code or some sort of config to describe what they wanted. And I wrote it in Python. I wrote it in JavaScript. I wrote it in Java. I wrote it in Groovy. Like I wrote it in a bunch of different languages, trying to toy with it to see what would be concise, simple, easy to read. And it turned out that a lot of them were fairly concise to read in Prolog. Assuming you can get your brain wrapped around the fact that, oh my God, it's Prolog. I haven't seen Prolog since university, and that was a long time ago. So we embedded Prolog to do it. The truth is now that we've got more of a plugin model available in Gerrit, we're not an OSGI application, despite the fact that OSGI icon exists here. We are so not an OSGI application. We've got a little plugin model starting to develop, and we're probably going to create a plugin hook point at the place that Prolog interpreter executes. And then people could start writing that logic in anything as a plugin, and the Prolog stuff will be one option, but you could plug in your own Python or your own Java code or whatever into that place. We're not sure exactly how we'll wire that, but we're probably going to go that direction soon, because people will want to do things more complicated that are hard to do in Prolog. Let's face it, there is some stuff that's hard to write in Prolog. Any other questions? One here. So the question is there any Eclipse support to do the review from within Eclipse? There is. The Myelin project has a subproject, Myelin Reviews. And Myelin Reviews has a connector that talks to Gerrit and can download things and put it into the workbench. I think there's another project trying to spin up to do something similar, but a little different way, but again, doing code reviews with Gerrit functionality. There's a question over here. I'm sorry, I missed some of that. What? The rules. The rules are stored in the Git repository as committed as part of a history. I was earlier showing you my config branch, and you can see that these are access control modifications that I made in the web UI, and oh, look, I made a typo trying to set up my example today, so I fixed it this morning. And here's where I added the implementation for the Go style and the Prolog for it. So the rules are all nicely version controlled. Because it's just a branch, like any other branch in your repository, you can code review changes to the access controls or to the rules. And people can go into the access control editor in the web UI, and even if they don't have permission to make a modification, at the bottom here you can say, like, they won't have the save changes, but they have a save for review button. And that'll create a code review with the modification, and then an administrator that does have access to make the changes can review it and can actually submit it, and then the rules take effect immediately, whatever that change was. So it's quite powerful to have code review on top of access controls. Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you for your attention. And like I said, we have the book discount, and this is our website.